Hello, I'm Dan Aykroyd. It's an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to be able to introduce to you this film, Evidence, the Case for NASA UFOs. As the goal of the UFO movement since Roswell in 1947 has been to expose the government's knowledge of the UFO phenomenon and the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence, this may be the most compelling, shocking, and powerful case presented at the dawn of the age of the new millennium. To expose the hidden secrecy behind UFOs and the government's knowledge of them. This postulation now is not based on the anecdotes, film, video, and data previously assembled, but rather on the United States government's own NASA footage, photographed by the astronauts themselves on numerous space shuttle missions. Broadcast live to Earth during the 1990s, it is also based on deep investigational written correspondence between the author of this film and some of NASA's research scientists. After seeing this film, you will undoubtedly conclude, as I did, that the volume and quality of the evidence is irrefutable and undeniable. Further, this evidence prepares us for perhaps the most vital revelation, which will be revealed to us in the new millennium. And that is that we are far from alone in this multiverse we inhabit, and that there is at least one species of extra-dimensional or extraterrestrial entity that is interested in our own well-being and survival in a most profound and positive and life-affirming way. Finally, it provides empirical, ancient archaeological evidence that there is someone out there, a species, a race of beings who are very interested in our progress on Earth, and perhaps in a benevolent and life-affirming way. You will see that in this film, the evidence is compelling, it's genuine, it's authentic, and it gives us hope. Thank you. Here, now, Evidence, the Case for NASA UFOs.
A deep, 6-year scientific investigation into unidentified flying object phenomena, broadcast live by NASA throughout the 1990s space shuttle missions.
According to NASA's Space Act, signed on July 29, 1958, Section 102, Paragraph C, Subparagraph A, we read, information obtained or developed by the administrator in the performance of his functions under this Act shall be available for public inspection, except information authorized or required by federal statute to be withheld and information classified to protect the national security. Would NASA consider contact with an extraterrestrial civilization a threat to national security? And if they did, would they classify it to protect the national security?
That's what this investigation is about. We're probing deep inside of NASA, looking for answers into what may be UFOs appearing during space shuttle missions and trying to find out an answer, because we know that they wouldn't come out and tell us. They would classify it to protect the national security. Welcome to Evidence, the case for NASA's UFOs. Hi, my name is David Sereda. Throughout the 1990s, the program manager of a cable TV station named Martin Stubbs recorded over 400 hours of live NASA broadcasts. During these broadcasts, there were many scenes of what appeared to be UFOs. In about 1997, a photographer friend of mine named Mike Boyle, who knew Martin Stubbs and knew about the footage, approached me and asked me to conduct an investigation into the scientific community. What you're about to see may be the most powerful case yet to prove that we have actually made contact with an extraterrestrial civilization.
Recognize what is in your sight, and that which is hidden from you will become plain to you. For there is nothing hidden which will not become manifest. Jesus, the Gospel of Thomas.
In 1989, I got into a long conversation about nuclear fusion with NASA's head of propulsion, power, and energy, Dr. Earl Van Landingham. At the end of the conversation, I decided to take a risk and ask him, has NASA ever made contact with an extraterrestrial civilization? Had they ever seen any UFOs on their space shuttle missions? He answered no, and he said, when you consider the distances between our solar system and our nearest stars, Alpha Centauri A and B, 4.3 light years from Earth. Sirius is 8.7 light years from Earth. That means that when a spacecraft is doing the speed of light, it takes 8.7 years in constant space travel. Not stopping for donuts and coffee, not stopping to use the bathroom, just constant space travel.
Continuamos en la siguiente parte. Hola amigos de Factor Maya, aquí con la continuación de Evidencia, el caso en la NASA de los OVNIs.
To get to Earth in 8.7 years. Alpha Centauri would take 4.3 years to get here. That's an incredibly long period of time and a very deep commitment to going from one point in space to the other. And to acquire velocities that great, we need a tremendous amount of energy in the form of propulsion and to create the velocity that a spacecraft needs to get from that point to the other. When Earl Van Landingham took this into consideration, he said the energy signal, the actual energy coming off of the spacecraft would be so powerful, such an enormous amount of energy required for a spacecraft to do anywhere near light speed would be so huge we would detect the signal well in advance of the arrival of the spacecraft. When we consider the speed of light, which is 186,282 miles per second, which comes to about 670 million miles per hour. And when we compare that to some of the propulsion systems we're using today, for example, the Apollo missions to the moon averaged just a little over 3,000 miles per hour. The space shuttle today maintains the speed of about 18,000 miles an hour as it orbits around the 25,000-mile circumference of the Earth every 90 minutes. And our fastest satellites today can do maybe 35,000 miles an hour. So when you compare tops 35,000 miles an hour to 670 million miles per hour, you can see that we're nowhere near the speed of light, and that's why we're very confined in our space travel at the current time. So, considering that an extraterrestrial civilization would have to be far more advanced than ours, they would have to have the energy, the tremendous amount of energy coming in the form of propulsion and giving their spacecraft velocity to get here. We should detect a signal of tremendous powerful energy. Where would we detect such a signal, and how would we detect it? So far, cameras and telescopes and other means of making detections, such as radar, are limited to the electromagnetic spectrum. Light, in the form of photons or waves, bounce off of solid objects. If this was an apple or an orange, you would see photons doing the speed of light, bouncing off of that, so that we can observe phenomena happening right in front of our eyes. So we observe everything in regards to the speed of light. If we were going to actually see a spacecraft that could come here from such great distances and be able to even go way beyond the speed of light, we should be looking at something so powerful, something that we had never seen before. And I suspect where we should look is in the upper part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So for the next part, we're going to actually look at what the electromagnetic spectrum is and what light is, so we can see where the best place to actually detect a signal from a spacecraft would be. So what is light? Light, in effect, is actually just energy, vibrating in different energy spectrums. I've made a chart here of the electromagnetic spectrum, what is known as the electromagnetic spectrum. And we can see, basically, from the diagram, that light is just energy in the form of waves. And these waves, as we go higher into this energy spectrum, start to oscillate faster and faster and faster per second. It was Heinrich Hertz who identified electromagnetic waves as Hertzian waves. Every single second you could produce one oscillating wave, you would have 1 Hertz. And the higher you would go into the spectrum, you would get more and more and more oscillations per second in this wave. In fact, this actual chart here is not very accurate, because even when you get into the radio and television spectrum, Hertzian waves are oscillating up to the millions of times per second. But anyway, Max Planck, the godfather of quantum physics, was the first physicist to come up with an energy formula in regards to the electromagnetic spectrum. He said energy was equal to the frequency with which these waves are quanta of light oscillated. So the more oscillations per second that occurred in a wave, the greater the energy was present. Einstein won the Nobel Prize in 1921 for explaining the photoelectric effect. The photoelectric effect is essentially the conversion of photons, the mass particles that are basically light, and converting them into electrons, which is energy. He discovered that when photons struck a metal plate or a conductor, the metal plate ejected an electron. So when the photons, which are light particles, came into the object, the conductor ejected an electron, and that electron had a charge on it. So what that showed is that photons, light, had energy in them, and that light could be converted into usable electricity. Well, and when we consider again the equation of energy in relation to space travel, and that we needed this huge amount of energy in order for a spacecraft to do the speed of light, many problems arise. Einstein said in his formula E equals mc squared that as a spacecraft or any mass object tried to approach the speed of light, the impeding forces of inertia became so great on that mass that the amount of energy required had to increase proportional to how fast you were going. Eventually, Stephen Hawking wrote of Einstein's equation that the problem with attaining the speed of light for any spacecraft would be that as that spacecraft tried to reach light speed, its mass would increase so much that an infinite amount of energy would be required for the spacecraft to attain the speed of light, and therefore it could never actually attain the speed of light. So, energy is the big problem. We need tremendous amount of energy for a spacecraft to do the speed of light, and if we were going to detect a spacecraft that had the kind of energy required to go the speed of light, it should be detectable somewhere, we would hope, in the electromagnetic spectrum. Today, most of our cameras look in the visible light spectrum right here. This is all we see with our human brains. So this is what we know of light today. There are radio and TV photons. There are microwave photons. There are infrared photons detectable usually as heat. Some snakes and reptiles can actually see in the infrared, but our eyes can't see that low in frequency. Then there's the color red. Red is actually a frequency of energy. It's actually a frequency of energy wave. And the color orange, and going all the way up into green, into blue, into violet. Violet is the most energetic color that our brains can see, and most of our cameras can see. Above violet is ultraviolet. And ultraviolet light is divided into near, far, and extreme. So the ultraviolet bandwidth, as we know it, actually extends a little further than my diagram shows here, but basically goes 5 or 6 times the bandwidth that the human eye can see. So again, if we can observe and take pictures into these higher spectrum, what we are actually seeing in that spectrum is more energy, actual energy in the form of electromagnetic waves. When we take a picture in the X-ray spectrum, we're actually seeing energy. And by the time we get up into gamma rays, we're seeing a tremendous amount of energy in the form of an observation. So again, at the UFO, we're coming here from another planet, from another star system, and we were expecting it to have a tremendous amount of energy to allow that spacecraft to conquer the vast distances of space in very little time. We should be detecting something that should be way up into at least the visible light spectrum and even higher. So far, SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence in Mountain View, California, uses a vast array of radio telescopes to try to look for intelligent signals in the form of radio signals or TV signals coming from another planet or another star. And if we receive such a signal, such as in the movie Contact, you would expect to see an intelligent signal in the form of a radio or TV wave. But so far, that effort has retrieved nothing. I believe the reason they haven't found anything down here is because there's not enough energy down here. They forgot the energy part of the equation, that it takes energy to get velocity in the form of propulsion to get here. And even an intelligent signal coming from another planet would require tremendous amounts of energy. So I believe we should be looking at least here in the visible light spectrum, and we have. There have been many alleged reported sightings of UFOs in this spectrum because that's what we see. But in my philosophy, when I consider Einstein's law equals mc squared, that mass cannot attain the speed of light because of the forces of resistance and inertia.
Continuamos en la siguiente parte. Hola amigos de Factor Maya, aquí con la continuación de Evidencia, el caso de la NASA de los OVNIs.
We should be looking at least here in the visible light spectrum, and we have. There have been many alleged reported sightings of UFOs in this spectrum because that's what we see. But in my philosophy, when I consider Einstein's law equals mc squared, that mass cannot attain the speed of light because of the forces of resistance and inertia, I would expect a spacecraft to be pure energy, something that is not even physical as we know it, something that would be matter vibrating in a very high frequency state. And basically we should be looking for a craft that looks like an energy ball or an energy wave, and that energy wave should be a very, very energetic wave that should only be detectable in these upper spectrum. So what I started to do is to see where was NASA looking. NASA knows the same thing I'm telling you. Space scientists know the same thing that I'm telling you. Where are they looking? And what I found out was the space shuttle's video cameras were looking into these upper spectrum of light. In fact, the video camera on the space shuttle can see near ultraviolet photons as well as the visible light spectrum. And this is exactly where we would start to see something with a tremendous amount of energy. Say this was the UFO here, and it wasn't visible down here. That would tell me, if we were detecting something here, just to start with, that object would be a very, very high energy object. It would be a quantumized, phenomenal aircraft or spacecraft. And there would be nothing physical about it. It would be pure energy. In fact, we should be looking for a spacecraft that is made of pure energy. And what you're about to see in this investigation is black and white video footage taken from the space shuttle throughout the 1990s, and a camera that is capable of seeing into at least the near UV spectrum. So if some of these objects that we see in the tape were not visible to people's naked eyes down in here, it should come as no surprise. We're looking at high energy phenomenal objects.
To punish me for my contempt for authority, fate made me an authority myself. Albert Einstein.
In 1996-97, I began my investigation at NASA. I decided, who can I talk to at NASA to do an investigation into unexplainable phenomena? And at the top of my list were astrophysicists and astrochemists. I looked on NASA's website and found the email address for Dr. Joseph Newth III, the NASA head of astrochemistry, and started a dialogue with him that turned out to be very successful. He first told me that NASA was making observations of unexplainable objects entering the Earth's atmosphere, detectable only in the ultraviolet range of light, something that was very peculiar to me. The idea that an object could only be visible in the ultraviolet suggested to me a quantumized, very, very energetic object. and it was not visible in lower spectra of light. It was very, very curious. The scientist who headed the investigation was Dr. Louis A. Frank. And Frank basically made observations on satellites that were roughly 25,000 kilometers away from the Earth, orbiting the Earth at a very, very large radius. And the satellite was called Polaris. The Polaris satellite was taking pictures in the far ultraviolet of the Earth. And he started to notice these impacting objects that he called small comets. They're about 40 feet wide, made mostly of water, and he detected they were made mostly of water. He didn't know for sure, but they were made mostly of water, and they were impacting the Earth at a rate of about 10 to 20 million impacts a year. Okay, so that was where I started. Those objects apparently were fluffy, house-sized comets of very low density and looked like energy balls. They actually didn't really look like water, and he wasn't sure they were made of water. So I decided to write Dr. Knuth a letter at NASA and ask him about these things to see if there was any similarities to these and these alleged UFOs that were showing up on the black and white video cameras of the space shuttle. I wrote him, "Dear Dr. Knuth, if these little meteors are hitting the Earth's upper atmosphere and dissolving, wouldn't the intense solar radiation break the H2O into oxygen and hydrogen separated, thus releasing tremendous amounts of oxygen into the upper atmosphere? When oxygen undergoes further solar radiation, O2, oxygen, transmutates into O3, ozone. Could these space meteors be actually healing our ozone layer? Is this proof that there is a God? Please answer." I wasn't actually kidding about the ozone question, because water basically is made of hydrogen and oxygen. And when water is exposed to the intense radiation from our sun, X-rays and gamma rays, with temperatures that are off the chart as far as humans could possibly bear, and even ultraviolet light, we know, is much hotter than visible light. We know that because we get skin cancer when we allow ultraviolet light to penetrate the Earth's atmosphere, and it can actually cause very serious damage to our skin. The first question about these objects being water to me was, how could water transit from one point in space to Earth and actually survive this intense radiation? In theory, in space theory, space is minus 273 degrees centigrade. It's freezing in space. But as soon as any object, like any gas, liquid, or object appears in space, it basically gets bombarded by tremendous radiation from the sun and tremendous radiation from the stars in the form of X-rays and gamma rays and ultraviolet light and so on. And the temperatures, the nuclear reactions that go on in the water would be so intense the water would burn up in a matter of seconds. These are allegedly 40-ton balls of water doing 35,000 miles an hour. But how did they get here? How did they come from the vast distances of space and get here and remain as they are? It has been known for a very long time that the Earth is under constant bombardment by extraterrestrial material, 20 kilotons per year, most of which is micron-sized dust shed by comets and asteroids, as well as some finite number of larger meteors. The house-sized comet proposal is in addition to this known flux, and is unique in that these bodies are supposed to consist mostly or almost exclusively of water. Because no satisfactory mechanism has been proposed to explain their survival in the interplanetary medium or their non-detection by a variety of other means, example IRAS, COBE, and IEU, most scientists do not believe that such bodies actually exist. The general belief is that the observations are valid, but the interpretations are wrong. If the interpretation is correct, however, the rate of deposition into the Earth's atmosphere of oxygen or water is only a minute fraction of the amount that is already there, except in the uppermost layers. For this reason, additional oxygen would be much too small to measure. If large masses of meteoric material relative to the mass of the Earth's atmosphere were to impact the Earth, the effects would be disastrous, even if the impactors were only made of water. So he's saying that these small amounts of water that are entering the Earth's atmosphere don't have the potential, in his opinion, as the head of astrochemistry at NASA, to produce a significant amount of ozone to heal our ozone layer. But he does understand the fundamental problem. Most scientists don't believe the detection of these objects are real because none of them show up on infrared satellites. Infrared is heat. And again, if intense radiation were hitting these balls of water and they started to heat up, you should get a very, very high heat signal that should be detectable on infrared, but no signal appeared. So the mystery gets very, very deep about what these objects may be. Dear Dr. Newt, thanks for the info. So the phenomena couldn't be from the comet. However, how could any object made mostly of water in liquid form survive in space over any great distances unless it had some kind of phenomenal membrane to protect it? Wouldn't the H2O, as you observed, absorb the intense radiation from the sun and produce heat so much that it would dissolve the H and the O? If the temperature of cold space is minus 273 degrees centigrade, and upon exposure to direct intense radiation from the sun, tremendous heat is formed. At 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, hydrogen separates from oxygen. How could such an object travel in space for even a minute, let alone travel from one point in space to another in less?
Continuamos en la siguiente parte. Hola amigos de Factor Maya, aquí con la continuación de Evidencia, el caso en la NASA de los OVNIs.
Again, I'm proposing the problem of how these objects detected by Dr. Louis A. Frank in the ultraviolet, how could they have possibly arrived at Earth? In theory, they could not. It didn't make any sense to me how they could. He immediately wrote me back, Dear Mr. Sereda, you have enumerated a few of the problems with Frank's hypothesis, and probably now realize why few scientists think that the phenomena seen by Louis Frank are actually comets. No one doubts that he has observed something in capital letters, just not comets. In spite of the fact that many people are sure that Frank's explanation for his observations are incorrect, there has been no good alternative explanation proposed yet. I'm sure that there will eventually be one that even Frank can agree to. So this letter shows amazing evidence that NASA is actually detecting something in space that's moving, that's coming to our Earth, and it shouldn't be there. Something that defies all the laws of physics. If you remember what I said about the electromagnetic spectrum earlier, that we should be detecting an object in the high upper frequencies of light and not detectable in the lower, that would be evident to suggest that we're looking at a highly quantized object, which means a highly energized object. This detection fits all of those descriptions and all those criteria. But this isn't the end of my investigation. But for now, this is what I found out. That NASA was observing something out there and they didn't know what it was. It was the first time that anyone at NASA could admit that there was an unidentified and unexplained phenomena happening in our skies and that no one had the answer. Dear Dr. Newt, thanks for the email response to my question. I'm amazed at how such a phenomenon can be observed, yet denial of its existence because it doesn't fit into the theory of the solar system. What are the chances that the H2O house-sized objects are tailings from the recent passing of the comet Hale-Bopp? Any ideas? Do you have any more thoughts on this? Please send email. Thanks. Dear Mr. Sereda, I would agree with your amazement in the scientific community ignoring Frank's observations if it were true. However, that is not the case. I know of no individual that does not believe that Frank saw something. The controversy centers just on what it was that yielded this signal. He believes that house-sized comets of very low density are responsible for both the recent detection of water and his previous 1985 observations using the DE spacecraft's UV cameras. Few other people agree with him. By the way, those previous observations would mean that the phenomena would be a continuous process rather than one associated with a particular comet such as Hale-Bopp. The reasons are many, but the best center on the fact that these objects should have been detected on several other satellites such as COBE, IRAS, and ISO. Those are infrared satellites. These satellites have instruments that are very sensitive to radiation in the infrared region. These fluffy, house-sized objects should be at a temperature near 300 K or even higher as they near the Earth, since very fluffy objects are much better absorbers in the visible than they are emitters in the infrared.
Revelation, which will be revealed to us in the new millennium. And that is that we are far from alone in this multiverse we inhabit, and that there is at least one species of extra-dimensional or extraterrestrial entity that is interested in our own well-being and survival in a most profound and positive and life-affirming way. Finally, it provides empirical, ancient archaeological evidence that there is someone out there, a species, a race of beings who are very interested in our progress on Earth, and perhaps in a benevolent and life-affirming way. You will see that in this film, the evidence is compelling, It's genuine, it's authentic, and it gives us hope. Thank you. Here, now, evidence, the case for NASA UFOs.
A deep, 6-year scientific investigation into unidentified flying object phenomena.
Hello, I'm Dan Aykroyd. It's an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to be able to introduce to you this film, Evidence, the case for NASA UFOs. As the goal of the UFO movement since Roswell in 1947 has been to expose the government's knowledge of the UFO phenomenon, the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence, this may be the most compelling, shocking, and powerful case presented at the dawn of the age of the new millennium. To expose the hidden secrecy behind UFOs and the government's knowledge of them. This postulation now is not based on the anecdotes, film, video, and data previously assembled, but rather on the United States government's own NASA footage, photographed by the astronauts themselves on numerous space shuttle missions. Broadcast live to Earth during the 1990s, it is also based on deep investigational written correspondence between the author of this film and some of NASA's research scientists. After seeing this film, you will undoubtedly conclude, as I did, that the volume and quality of the evidence is irrefutable and undeniable. Further, this evidence prepares us for perhaps the most vital to NASA's Space Act, signed on July 29, 1958. Section 102, paragraph C, subparagraph A, we read, information obtained or developed by the administrator in the performance of his functions under this Act shall be available for public inspection, except information authorized or required by federal statute to be withheld and information classified to protect the national security. Would NASA consider contact with an extraterrestrial civilization a threat to national security? And if they did, would they classify it to protect the national security?
That's what this investigation is about. We're probing deep inside of NASA, looking for answers into what may be UFOs appearing during space shuttle missions and trying to find out an answer, because we know that they wouldn't come out and tell us. They would classify it to protect the national security.
Broadcast live by NASA throughout the 1990s space shuttle missions.